Welcome back to the Groundless Ground podcast, the leading edge of integrative mental health. I'm your host, Lisa Dale Miller. You can subscribe to, download, and review the Groundless Ground on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn, and of course, find out more at groundlessground.com. I'm ready to go. How about you? These days, divorce is almost as much a part of life as marriage. Yet most couples are in the dark about pro-social, non-toxic approaches to divorce. Enter Gabrielle Hartley, attorney, mediator, and co-author of Better Apart, a practical guide for skillfully executing a divorce and emerging a wiser, more compassionate, and resilient human being. The uniqueness of this approach comes from expert integration of sound legal wisdom and teachings on skillful means from yogic and Buddhist philosophies. You will clearly detect my deep appreciation for Gabrielle and this book, as it has radically simplified the way I counsel patients who find themselves in divorce, recontemplation, or ultimately deciding to separate and/or divorce. This episode is inspiring and informative. I ask difficult questions, many of which I often hear as a marriage and family therapist, particularly here in Silicon Valley, where divorce can often be ugly, protracted, and wreak financial devastation and emotional turmoil for all involved parties. It's a total pleasure to have you on the Groundless Ground. This book is a wish fulfillment for me as a marriage and family therapist. And I think by the end of the podcast, many of my colleagues in the marriage and family world will be making all their clients who are having anything to do with divorce get this book. I would like you to tell us the difference between legal wisdom and legal advice.
I'm glad you asked that. I haven't been asked that particular question yet. Legal advice is what your attorney is going to give you. They're going to tell you what the law is where you live in your particular jurisdiction and what you should do to get the best outcome, which may, in your lawyer's mind, be the biggest kill, get the most money, get the most time with your kids, get the most. Because many family lawyers and all lawyers were expected to, in fact, we have an obligation to fulfill zealous advocacy on the part of our client. Zealous advocacy can be taken and often is taken by lawyers to mean to get the most. So that's legal advice, and that's what your lawyer is going to give you. And what you're going to take away from Better Apart is legal wisdom. Look into yourself. What is the best for your family and for you for the long view? The advice your attorney is going to give you is going to be about getting the win now in court. But in fact, your divorce and your family is not a zero-sum game. It is a transition for you and for your family and for your children. And while winning in the moment may feel good, you're not really winning. You may, in fact, be creating unnecessary toxicity for yourself and for your family.
Well said. I wanted to ask this question first because you and I are going to be talking about doing a divorce wisely, how to be in it, how to vision what you want from your divorce. Better Apart, to me, appears to be a book that's really written for someone who either has not been very skillful in their marriage or they've been married to someone who's not been very skillful.
Better Apart is really filled with lessons for all of us, whether we're married or not married, about having a deeper engagement with ourselves and to create vision of what we want to manifest and to recognize the internal power that we have to actually recreate our reality as we go through regular life, but more importantly, when we're going through difficult life transitions and transformations.
People who divorce tend to divorce the way they're married.
That's right.
This is something I recommend to my patients when they tell me they're ready to do a divorce, and that is to work with a collaborative lawyer. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to describe collaborative law, what it is, how it's different from regular family divorce law, and what are the benefits of choosing to do collaborative law.
Collaborative with a big C compared to just two lawyers collaborating, which happens all the time, has been around probably, I guess, since the mid 90s. It is not available all over the country yet. Collaborative law is an agreement made between the lawyers and the litigants, the parties divorcing, where they are contractually obligated to stay out of court. Unlike when you go to a mediator who is a neutral third party who helps the individuals arrive at an agreement that feels good to both of them, to each of them, when you are engaged in the collaborative law process, you are each represented by an attorney, and the laws and the rules around evidence are softened up. You have a very clear guide of exactly what you're supposed to do, an outline of what you're going to do within each meeting. You're not supposed to talk about the meeting when you're outside of the meeting. The upside to collaborative law is that you have a strong advocate by your side through the process, and that you can feel calm that you're going to resolve things without going to court, which is a downside of litigation, is that it can be protracted and extremely expensive. Unlike mediation, you're not worried that your spouse, who maybe was controlling or manipulative or a little bit quicker than you on certain financial matters, they're not going to be able to get the better of you within the collaborative law context. For some people, it can be a problem because there are a few mechanisms to enforce incremental agreements. So if you make an agreement to do something, if your county where you live doesn't let you file a temporary order without triggering certain time standards, et cetera, it can be problematic because there's no enforcement mechanism. And if it breaks down, you have to start from scratch.
Because divorce is expensive. So many people go down the road of mediation. Please explain to people why, even when you mediate a divorce, you still need a lawyer.
Okay, so the whole thing that's so awesome about mediation is you're coming to an agreement together. And so even if you don't love the terms, you're agreeing to them in a consensus basis. And you're so much likely to wind up angry, frustrated, or back in court over this agreement, at least not quickly until lots of circumstances may change. However, if you enter a mediated agreement and you first don't know what your rights are, you're so much more likely to be angrier even than had you not gone to mediation in the first place, because you may feel double crossed. You may feel that your spouse really knew that they were taking advantage. Sometimes when people go to mediation before they hire a lawyer, and I don't mean hire a lawyer to represent you, I just mean go and have an hour or an hour and a half meeting, take good notes, maybe ask if you can record their notes or bring a friend with you, and get all the information so that when you go to the mediator, you know what you are getting, you truly understand what you are giving up, and you're going from a place of knowledge. If you go to a mediator and you don't know what your rights are, you're more apt to make an agreement that after the fact you're angry at, and you can be angry at your spouse, but you really shouldn't be angry at your spouse because it's not their responsibility to educate you on the law. That's your responsibility.
I have a feeling you wrote this book because your goal in the end was to create ideal clients.
I don't know about that. I think I had a lot of goals. One of them was to legitimize the idea that divorce is not a war. I don't know if I've told you, I grew up with parents who divorced when I was 9 and my brother was 6. We lived in New York City and we had shared custody long before that was a thing. And people were always looking at me. My friends' parents were always saying, "Oh, look how well adjusted you are given your crazy circumstance." I always knew that, my circumstance was actually great. I saw both of my parents basically every day, the way that their custody arrangement was. Not like it was without problems, but they were really able to both put my brother and myself first, but also they were able to hold themselves to a standard so they could feel good about themselves. And then when I went and I worked for the judge and I saw how many people really didn't even treat themselves with respect, I just felt like I wanted to bring forward the idea that your divorce, while very difficult and heart wrenching for most people, it can actually be the launch pad for a better life going forward. It can be a transformative process if you use it to be one, just like any other really horrible thing that happens in any of our lives.
Did your parents' divorce have anything to do with your impulse to go to law school?
That's a really good question. I knew I wanted to work for myself and I wanted to travel the world. I really never wanted to have anything to do with divorce. I felt that divorce dominated a lot of the themes in my life. I actually took family law pass fail. And then this opportunity arose to work for the person who's now head of the New York State trial court for all divorces, Jeff Sunshine. I took that opportunity and I found that it was unbelievably gratifying. I felt at that table I was able to close even the most acrimonious of divorces. It was personally very validating. Yeah, I sort of wound up on a path that I never thought I would go on, but it was really just the right path for me. Now I actually do divorce mediation for people all around the country online.
So when you do that, do they then take the agreement to a lawyer in their state?
I don't draft an agreement if they're not in a state where I'm licensed to practice law. I just create a memorandum of understanding. They find mediation friendly attorneys and they get their advice. And then, I get to it with them and we talk about mindfulness to the extent that they're open to it. And we sort of go forward in a way that when they look backward on their life, they can feel good. Sometimes I even interface with therapists. I have a much more holistic approach.
It sounds like you had this really reparative experience working for the judge.
What I would tell your listeners who are getting divorced, even if it's messy, if you're sort of like holding it together and your kids are pretty functional and you're not running into court every time things go wrong, your kids will be okay. Transitions between households is bad. Too many transitions, too many transitions. I hear that all the time. And I always say, it is not about the transition, it is about the conflict. Conflict is bad. You're the mental health professional, though, so
Well,
you can weigh in on that.
I'm going to second the motion largely because I am a trauma therapist. I work with trauma all day long. And I can pretty much say that human beings as an organism are wired for resilience. Anything that may have happened that would cause problems for any child in a divorce, probably difficult attachment, got set up in the first 1 to 3 years of life. But in general, children are very resilient, and transition
Totally.
actually is very good because it creates a sense of flexibility. As
Mhm.
you've said, people who are divorcing, you have a responsibility to be wise and kind and caring.
In Better Apart, in the parenting section, I have a whole chapter where I talk about considerations and try to be really as robust as possible in looking at what makes sense for your family, for your children. Let's say you don't have a lot of conflict, but somebody is extraordinarily disorganized. Well, if that's the case, having too many transitions might not work because it can be flooding emotionally. We're all so different. I can see patterns that the attorneys and the community believes that this is the way to do this. But in fact, we are so varied, and though we all need consistency, we all need love, we all need care, we all need to be able to anticipate certain things. But how we get there can look in so many different ways. And I would encourage people to just look deeply into yourselves, into your family's model, into what system will work best for you. I think there's so much pressure on everybody to have shared custody right now. It's not necessarily the best thing for everybody. There's families where one parent enjoys being home more with the kids, or that just works better, and the other one makes a lot of money. There is no shame in my mind to having a more traditional setup. It's just you should know what the options are.
I'm just going to read a quote from the book to get us into the meat of this book. No matter who initiated the separation or divorce process, your legacy depends on your inner attitude, your outer composure, and your vision for the future. Applying the practices of patience, respect, clarity, peace, and forgiveness will help ensure that you spend the least amount of time and money possible on lawyers, mediators, and courts, and that you emerge with a durable agreement that works for your entire family. This isn't just some wish fulfillment on your part. You actually give people practices in order to cultivate this wisdom, knowledge, in order to be able to own it. There's a tremendous mixture here between didactic and practical that I love. And part of that, I think, comes from the contribution of Elena Brower. Before we go to the chapters, I really would like you to tell me, how did you get involved in meditation and mindfulness?
I grew up in the 70s and my parents were kind of hippies, and we used to go to barn yoga and all kinds of wacky yoga when I was a young girl. In my 20s and early 30s, I took a lot of yoga, a place called Yoga People in downtown Brooklyn. And I used to go most days during the week after going to law school or going to court and then working for the judge. I love the whole idea of grounding. I love the whole idea of going in. I'm such an extreme extrovert. Sometimes going inward takes more mindful noticing and practicing than it may for an introvert who has to work maybe to cultivate that other piece of them. It was always such a natural pairing of going inward and creating a affirmation or mantra to keep your mind's eye positive on a hopeful direction while I was meeting with litigants who were about to go and have a trial. I would have them do some deep breathing, and the secretary used to make fun of me, like, "What are you doing in there, Gab?" And I'd be like, "Shush!" And I resolve most of my cases because I have this whole idea of do some breathing, and then to try to listen with the same passion that you want to be heard. By listening with the
Mhm.
same passion you want to be heard, we can get to the meat of what everyone needs. And then by giving the essence of what is needed by each of the litigants, everything always just falls into place. I really wanted to integrate yoga and meditation with the heartbreaking realities of separation or divorce. And I started to write. And then I reached out to Elena, and we were friends in college. And she has grown to be a yoga and meditation guru, and she's internationally known. And I asked her if she'd like to collaborate on this project, and she was very excited to do so. She and her ex had a really elegant divorce, and they had a child. She navigated this process in a wonderful way, which she discloses a lot of personal sort of things throughout the book. When I expressed the idea that I wanted to bring my ideas forward in a way that was digestible and would be legitimate to people in the legal profession as well, because most of the books that were written before Better Apart were either written by therapists or by lawyers or by yoga people. But
Yep.
there has not been a book ever before that I could find that was a marriage, pardon the expression, of a yoga person and a divorce attorney, one who grew up with divorced parents, and Elena herself has been divorced. So we kind of have four different perspectives blended in. I have a lot of hope that therapists are going to like it. I just did a big presentation in New York City for some therapists, but also divorce litigators. And it was, I was like, just get in your seat. Once you hear about it, because they're like, my clients don't want to hear about being nice to each other. I'm like, your clients want to feel better. Everybody wants to feel better. When you're getting divorced, it doesn't hurt the client to think that the lawyer has a heart, wants to share it with them. I know. So you're chuckling because it's funny that they would think that this book wasn't good for their clients, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
can definitely imagine that lawyers would have a hard time visualizing people who are contentious already actually doing a divorce in a way that it's not characterized fully by contention.
And by the way, even if the divorce is contentious, the divorce process is going to end. I wanted Better Apart to be a resource that maybe they can't look at while they're in the middle of their ugly divorce. Maybe it's just going to sit on their shelf. And then 3 or 5 or 10 years later, when some of the pain has subsided because they've done trauma work with you, then they can go and look at this book and maybe they can go a little deeper, right? I mean, it's a trauma. Divorce is truly a trauma. And in my coaching practice, I work with lots of clients who are also seeing therapists because this is a really complicated issue that sometimes needs a little bit more.
I really want to encourage everyone away from what you just said. I think everyone should read this book when they're first thinking about divorce. There is so much here. So let's talk about the book itself. Addition of the wisdom view to me in this book is not spiritual bypass, which I have seen before. People using mindfulness, using meditation in order to gloss over what's hard. That you two were brave enough to create the right frame to say these skills are for when things are hard, not to make them easier, not so you're going to have an ideal divorce, but so no matter what's happening, you're able to bring the best of who you are to it.
That's exactly right.
As I mentioned before, you list these skills that make for the core of having a successful divorce: patience, respect, clarity, peace, and forgiveness. So I want to give you a chance to go through each one of these and basically give us a sense of why you chose those qualities.
as I talk about each one, they each seem like the most important, which says to me they're all really important. Patience is just something that needs to permeate the entire process. Divorce is so maddening. It's a slow process. Very often, you and your spouse are on two totally different emotional tracks. So you have to be patient with your spouse. You may have to be patient with yourself because you're feeling impatient. So you have to be patient with yourself about cultivating a patience practice. You may feel like your lawyer is not calling you back enough, and there may be a reason, but that can trigger impatience. The judge might not give a response that you want. The school might not understand. Your kids could be a mess. You just need to be able to take a step back and slow your mind down, slow your emotions down. And so we talk a lot about going inward through breathing, through mantras, through meditations to get yourself at a pace that is reasonable to get you to where you can actually recognize that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Patience needs to stay with you through the entire process and beyond.
What I love about this is two things that you've said. And these are two things that are threads through all the episodes of my podcast. They just keep coming up. Number one, being where you are with a sense of clarity and respect for where you are, to me, is patience for impatience. As human beings, we are wired to try to avert or end unpleasantness. And that's what I think I love about the patience chapters. You're basically encouraging people, this is unpleasant. Here are mindfulness skills and yoga skills to be able to allow yourself to land in unpleasantness without needing to run away.
And I don't like unpleasantness at all. I'm like one of the most impatient people you can meet. So I really love delving into patience because they say we teach what we need to learn, and patience is hard. You don't need to send that email as soon as you write it. Maybe send it to yourself. Maybe send it in 2 days, or maybe you never have to send it. Respect is all about the stories that we tell ourselves in order to elevate how we feel about ourselves. That might sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo talk. Let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. We are not talking about respecting somebody who treated you badly, although we do a bit get into how to find areas about your ex that you may want to start to focus on so that you can actually look at them and engage with them at some point. What we're really talking about is reclaiming or claiming, in many cases for the first time, self respect. A lot of people never really had self respect. And that might be the reason we got into a relationship where you weren't treated respectfully. There's lots of reasons why we don't have self-respect. Some of it can be how we were raised, mistaken beliefs based on cultural norms. I mean, there's just so many different things that happen to us throughout our lives. And some people really get ruined by their relationship because they got involved with somebody based on where they were in time and space when they got married. And then that person deteriorated their self-respect over time. Other times, maybe nothing so traumatic happened during the relationship, but just the very fact of the divorce can fill you with shame, especially many people who are very successful, great people who have good jobs or good friends or they're good parents or whatever, plenty of things to feel good about themselves. When your marriage breaks down, it just can really flood you with a sense of failure and shame. You have to really work at recapturing yourself. And sometimes we need to recognize, just like with patience, that slowest is fastest. We need to slow it down to bring it back in. In terms of how to develop it when we're feeling flooded with negative emotions, is every day try to work in a part of the day. If you have to start with just 5 minutes, that's fine, where you just remind yourself of something that's good about yourself, something that you like about yourself, or do something that you enjoy doing. What we want to do is start rewiring our mind so that we encourage our focus to be on positive rather than stuck in the swirl of disrespectful, shameful negativity that we're feeding ourselves within the inner loops of our mind.
I would say that's all really important. I would also say that in terms of respect and self respect, in my experience as a clinician, this particular issue is something that's endemic to the personality, especially the personality of the marriage. if there's always been power issues in the marriage, if there's always been lack of respect, that generally these kinds of power issues get played out in the divorce if there isn't awareness. Often the person who has had the power is not interested in awareness because it's gotten them a lot. So it's the person who hasn't had the power that generally doesn't have that underlying sense of empowerment, which includes self-respect, to guide them to be able to do a divorce where they get exactly what is fair for them. And they make sure that they are not undermined in the divorce the same way they've been undermined in the marriage.
We take that even further beyond the divorce into their next relationship.
I think this was great about the book because a lot of the repair work that a person is doing, I'm imagining that if you're really doing the repair work on yourself using the skills in the book, by the time the divorce is finished, you're just not going to end up with the same kind of relationship. You're a different person.
That's right. And the intention when we were writing it is that it's for you when you're thinking about divorce. In fact, we have a section between the intro and chapter 1 called Pause. Are you sure you need a divorce? If you're not too flooded and you're able to read it at any point as early as possible, that's great. But I'm just offering that in case you can't get yourself reading because the emotions are too high. Clarity is getting clear on what we can do and what we can't do. Where can we go and where can't we go? You know, who am I? Who are you? Who are our children? What are our endemic limitations? We all get stuck in our relationships if we're not married, maybe with our parents or our children. Why can't you just? Well, you know why? Because you can't. I believe, and I know this is definitely something that not all people agree with, people generally do the best they can. I guess I'm an optimist. If the best someone can do is not that great, that's unfortunate for you. It's also unfortunate for them. So, getting clear on the limitations that negatively impacted you, while they may at first blush appear to have positive ramifications for that person, there is always the underside, the shadow of that negative quality. Peace does not mean unicorns and fairies. Lawyers have said to me, "Oh, why did you make a chapter called Peace?"
You're painting a picture of lawyers that is everybody's stereotype.
No, they're not all like that, obviously. And some of these lawyers are my very dearest friends and they're wonderful people. They just look at things in a very narrow way. Peace is just about getting to neutral. Let's move away from the anger and the hate. If you can get to like love and friendship, fabulous. You want to get to neutral, and we can only go up from there. If we married someone and we were betrayed and we're feeling so horrible in the moment because of a trauma that's close in time and space, the circumstances of divorces, as you well know, are so varied. So is the reactivity around it. Most divorces, even when there is not tremendously acrimonious, there are times where we're not feeling particularly peaceful. Just feed yourself that little mantra, I'm calm, many times during the day. And one thing before I move on to forgiveness that pervades all of these 5 concepts is the idea of creating a habit around the intentionality of resetting how you think. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Gretchen Rubin and the Happiness Project. She has a whole book called Better Than Before. She talks about how a habit is something that you do, which over time becomes automatic. So we no longer have to think about doing it. If we train our brains to start making lists of things that make me happy or saying mantras that are positive, we just get in the habit. And there is a concept which I'm going to leave to you to discuss if you want to about neuroplasticity. The way we think can really change. And we have tremendous agency over our own minds. It's just that we have to know and be willing and ready to take that control. And we can start to feel better. And not just feel better, but actually be better grounded in our own legs in our own lives.
I want you to know I was profoundly moved by this chapter on peace because it's very rare, even in the clinical community, for people to bring up the benefit of neutrality or neutral. I want to stay there for just a moment because you are a lawyer. This is divorce land. I'm going to ask you some hard questions about neutral. I am a big fan of neutral. It's a lot of what I do in the room all day long with my patients because of the benefits of neutrality, not as a concept, but as an embodied experience. Your job when you're divorcing is to make sure you get everything the state tells you you are entitled to get. That doesn't sound neutral. It sounds as though you're taking a perspective that is very much in your court with yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you can't bring the attitude of neutrality to the intention of making sure that your divorce is equitable and fair. Their intention is not neutral. The intention is, I need to take care of myself and sometimes my children if the other partner's not that interested in the children. But it's very interesting to think about how to effectively accomplish that using a neutral stance.
So that's an interesting framing of the idea of neutrality. So, where we're going with neutrality is about your feelings and not so much about what your positions are, which are separate from how you feel. You may feel very angry and hurt and betrayed because your partner ran off with a new person. Or we want to bring the charge around that anger down to where you're no longer feeling angry, but instead you are recognizing that this happened and that it was awful that it happened to you and you remember it, but you're no longer feeling it, recognizing the feeling as a thought rather than embodying the feeling as part of who you are. In terms of the parenting plan, you want to look at what is best for the children. There's no objective best for the children. So, what's best for the children, given not just your opinion, but your knowledge that you have to continue to co parent in some way or other with this other person? That's where the neutral is. Recognizing you are not doing this on your own, whether or not you want to be doing it on your own. And sometimes you wind up having a parent who leaves and then you're stuck doing it on your own. And then you might be mad. But even when you're mad, I would encourage you to recognize the pluses. That doesn't mean you're now happy that they left you and left the children, but there are certain things to do. You have less negotiation to do. There's positives to every negative. And noticing the neutral is just a very powerful tool whenever we are trying to change behavior or change our thoughts and bring it from negative to a place where we can start to function.
Now, what I'm hearing you say is that neutral is part of the skill set of moving away from negative bias and including all of the possibilities, not just all the nightmare, but everything all the way to all the great benefits and everything in between. It's more of an open stance, which is inclusive of everything rather than that narrow stance of this is a nightmare.
Neutral is just about moving through where you are to get to a place where you can all coexist and continue to, in the best of circumstances, be a reformed family, because the court system is really not designed in most places to address this is not a car accident or a criminal act. This is a family that's not working out. We need to really remember that and honor that.
You're actually suggesting and helping people to cultivate a different relationship with anger.
That's right. Anger, I think, serves people at a certain point, when things first happen, so they don't just
Mhm.
deteriorate and fall apart. But the mask of anger is often held longer than serves people, in my opinion.
I agree. It's very destructive, both for the person as well as the other people in the family.
And for their friends and the multi generations, when we talk negatively, what happens sometimes is we move on and the other people don't. That happened in my own family. And I had to ask a family member to stop saying negative things about one of my parents because the other parent had let go of it. It just didn't feel good to anybody. And that's why I really encourage not only for everyone to get a lawyer, but get yourself a trauma therapist, get yourself a divorce coach, get yourself armed with smart, good people to help you through this time.
I was kind of surprised that you guys decided to go all the way to forgiveness.
I just love this quote so much. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So think about that. We're angry and we continue to feel angry and it feels so good to be mad because you're so mad, but guess what, your partner doesn't really care after some time. They might feel bad, but they've moved on often, and then you're still angry. You're just waiting to get back at them. You just need to get out of their backyard and into your front yard and start having more compassion for yourself and start living your life, because so far as we know right now, we only have one life that we're aware of. There may be some other lives. Don't you want to help yourself to live your most embodied, powerful life as possible? Only through compassion for yourself can you start to go there. Can you really have emotional freedom?
So, this is why I was interested that you went all the way to forgiveness, because to me, forgiveness is not necessary condition for moving beyond anger. Partly that's because you've already cultivated patience, respect, clarity, and a sense of neutrality. And out of
Mhm.
all these qualities comes an innate, compassionate recognition of the nature of suffering. Your suffering, the other person's suffering, the whole situation, the suffering of your children. I agree with you that compassion is the natural outcome of having practiced all these other skills. To me, forgiveness is a level that I'm always uncomfortable forcing
Mm.
people to think they have to go to, because honestly, I just don't think it's a necessary condition. I love it when people will go there.
What about forgiving yourself for making choices in retrospect were foolish choices? What about the beating ourselves up? I'll even go further and say, through the clarity, forgiveness is available. There's value to forgiving. And again, the value is to you. So I would just invite you to consider if you can find forgiveness, it may create a deeper sense of compassion.
This has come up before in the podcast, this difference between compassionate recognition and forgiveness. This is a difference between Eastern philosophical traditions and the Judeo Christian model. In the Judeo Christian traditions, forgiveness is the way to truly let go of all the distortion. In the yogic and Buddhist philosophical traditions, there's no forgiveness necessary for that kind of wise recognition and deep, compassionate opening to truth.
Maybe our words are a bit different, but our message and our core beliefs are the same.
Before we finish, there's two things I want to mention that this book has that made me so excited. There's a section on money. There are 5 skills that you give for dealing with the money issues in a divorce. And you also have a possession checklist, which I totally love because it makes it so much easier. And then the other thing I so appreciated was the section on custody. This is one of the places where I think, at least here in Silicon Valley, people get really tripped up on custody.
There's not really good resources out there. That's why I was very adamant that we needed to have that. I know from clients and from friends and family members who've been through this that when you're looking for a divorce resource other than like a do it yourself divorce book, there isn't a resource other than Better Apart that really outlines all the different considerations and how you might want to fashion your parenting plan and why certain things may or may not be better for you. And we also included a big section on resources, other books that you may want to read.
How does somebody go about finding the right divorce lawyer?
Word of mouth is really the best way. You should find a lawyer. And I do have a section where I have lots of questions to ask your lawyer. But the first thing I'd say is call your local bar association. They may just give you names of people who signed up, and like some of the better lawyers may not sign up because they have plenty of business anyway. Just get some names and call. See how you feel when you call. Make sure they really only practice family law, or at least that's their main interest. If you get like a criminal lawyer who also does family law, or someone whose background is in criminal law, if you're in the win-lose mentality of a criminal case, they may have a take no prisoners attitude towards a divorce. Similarly, if you hire someone who does a lot of business law, they may have an extraordinarily transactional approach, which may be good in terms of addressing the details of a complicated financial structure. And there's a time and place for that, but they may not really be very sensitive to the nuanced emotions that are at play. The people who are family lawyers exclusively are more attuned to the issues that come up for clients who are embroiled in divorce cases. You want to find someone who's mediation friendly. It doesn't mean that you have to go to a mediator. Just find someone who's known to be sort of settlement oriented, because lawyers, this is not a big secret, but we typically make more money when we go to court. If you hire me through Your Elegant Divorce or just through GabrielleHartley.com to do mediation, I mean, it's not that much money because you're hiring me for 5 or 10 or 15 hours. I'm not sitting in court day upon day. And those bills just add up tremendously to get 5 minutes in front of the judge. There's not just one easy answer to finding the best lawyer, but go with your gut. Once you have a lawyer, you don't want to be the client who changed lawyers 3 times. Anyone can make a mistake once.
In general, if you and the person you're divorcing have been able to actually communicate during your marriage and you're pretty much on the same page, it sounds to me like you're recommending that this couple consider mediation with legal advice.
Even if you guys don't communicate well and you're not on the same page, that doesn't matter. What matters is you're both honest and you both want to get it done. If one of you lies and is not forthcoming, mediation is not for you, or somebody's like a bully, that it's not for you. And if somebody really doesn't want to get divorced, they're going to drag it out, mediation may not be for you. But everybody else, if you have a skillful mediator, everybody wants to get it done. In the spirit of compromise, I can get the most impossibly disparate people to come together. You just need a really skillful mediator who listens passionately. If you choose not to get legal advice first, then please commit yourself to not being angry later on when you find out that you made an agreement to less than you may have been entitled to.
So we're coming to the end of our time. I want to give you a chance to talk about anything we haven't talked about, tell people how to get in touch with you.
So, if anyone is interested in my mediation services or to consult with me, you can contact me through GabrielleHartley.com. The book is available for order through the site, which will link you to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or ask for it in your local bookstore. I am right now partnering with several different wellness groups to run summits, and that'll be on my website. If you follow me on Instagram at Gabrielle L. Hartley, I do live posts several days a week, and I do take questions.
Well, this has been such an honor, such a pleasure. I can't thank you enough. You've made my life as a therapist so much easier. I now get to just say, go get this book. It will help you in more ways than you could possibly imagine as you go through your divorce. It's so great for mental health professionals because we are not lawyers. We cannot give legal advice. It's wonderful to give a resource to our patients from someone who can actually give them legal wisdom. These are the practical things you need to know. Often, even a lawyer won't tell you.
I do tend to get to it with my clients, but my understanding, when sometimes people come to me for a second consultation, they're like, oh my gosh, the last person I met with didn't ask me any of these questions.
Well, thank you so much, Gabby, for being on the Groundless Ground.
It's been so much fun.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To get in touch, please visit groundlessground.com. Let's dedicate our efforts to the healing of our planet and all its inhabitants. See you next time on the Groundless Ground.